Thank you, Daniel. How many of you here this morning believe that motivation is one of the keys to high performance in the workplace? What if I told you that motivation may be the one thing that's actually preventing high performance? There are over 100,000 books available on Amazon.com in the English language on the topic of motivation. There are over 270,000 books available on Amazon.com on the topic of leadership and management, most of which talk about motivation. And yet, if we take a look at our work, at our teams, and all around us, we can't help but observe that sustainable, long-term high performance is the exception rather than the rule. What's more, we really have a crisis in the workplace. What do I mean by this? Depending on the statistics you read, only about 10% of all employees are really engaged and satisfied with their work. These are the people who we routinely get high performance from. Another 20 to 30% are pretty satisfied and engaged with their work. And using traditional methods of management and leadership, we can also get high performance from these people for a certain amount of time. But the crisis is that upwards of 50% of all employees worldwide, particularly in developed countries, are not very engaged with their work, and 10, maybe even 20% are actively disengaged. Now, we know from years of research that satisfaction in the workplace is essential for performance of any kind. If we know so much about motivation, of all the hundreds of thousands of books, all the training programs, leadership training, MBA programs, why don't we see it working? More and more management thinkers and leadership thinkers are coming to the conclusion that traditional motivation as our default way of leadership simply does not work. But what could be the alternative? I'd like to share with you this morning a few of my insights and ideas about what the alternative could be and how you can use this information to build high-performing teams or to improve your own performance in the workplace without reverting to motivation. So what is the problem with motivation? Motivation is often this. It's the carrot and it's the stick. It's a system of rewards and punishments. In the workplace, as a manager, I expect my people to do what I say. The reward being a good salary, job security, the company car, a title, a promotion. But if my employees don't do as I say, then there's a punishment. You don't get the salary raise. I'll take your title away. I'll take your budget away. You may even lose your job. Now, we see this not only in the workplace. We see this everywhere in our society. Think about advertising. Let's say I have a beauty cream I want to sell to you. What am I going to tell you? Buy my beauty cream and your wrinkles will go away and you'll be beautiful until old age and you'll be happy. The message behind this is also, if you don't buy my beauty cream, then you'll have wrinkles and you'll be ugly and you'll never have sex again. Or think about in politics. Vote for me, I'm the ideal candidate. If you vote for me, we'll have the most beautiful country in the world. If you don't vote for me, the opposition party will get into power and all hell will break loose. At its core, motivation is very manipulative. And below that, we see that motivation is essentially based on fear. But why is this such a problem in the workplace? Fear triggers a fight or flight response in the brain. When we're in a fear modus, the limbic system and to a certain extent the reptilian brain, which are very old parts of the brain, are activated. Cortisol and adrenaline flood the body. And we know that cortisol and adrenaline in large amounts over a sustained period of time are extremely poisonous to the human body. And these are partially responsible for so many of the diseases we see around us, from cancer, heart disease, diabetes, these kinds of things. But coming back to the workplace, what we need in the workplace are the qualities that our prefrontal cortex offer: focused attention, self-control, creativity, communication, and planning. But when our minds are in a state of fight or flight, our mental energies are concentrated in other parts of the brain that are not dealing with the complexities that we have in our modern world in our workplace. If we take a look at around us in the workplace, this motivation puts people into a constant state of low-level fear, preventing them really from using all of their full mental capabilities for high performance. So I'm sure you'll agree with me that there is a neurological basis for stepping away from fear-based motivation as our default way of leadership in the world. So what's the alternative? I think that we should move towards something that I call inspiration. What is inspiration? I brought two definitions with me. Well, one definition in two different forms. As a noun, inspiration is a state of mental stimulation to do or feel something, especially something creative. Or as a verb, an action word, to inspire means to fulfill someone with the desire to feel or do something, especially something creative. Inspiration and motivation are two very different things. Motivation comes from the outside. It's manipulative. We try to create conditions for employees and for other people to get them to do what we want them to do. But inspiration is something that comes from the inside. It's that spark of genius, that spark of divinity within every single person, that light, that flame, that torch. It's about a way of being in the world. If you think about inspired people or inspiring leaders, people are attracted to them naturally because they're attracted to that warmth, to that light, to that vision, to that humanity in them. Imagine what things would be if we had workplaces that allowed people to be inspired. Inspired people don't need to be motivated to bring high performance. They bring high performance on their own. I'd like to share with you now a few ideas about how we can create inspired and inspiring workplaces. But before I let the cat out of the bag, I'll talk briefly about one of the things that may have got us into the situation that we're in now. And it has to do with the way that we design work. How many of you here this morning have ever hired someone? Okay? And how many of you who have hired someone you thought was the ideal person, only later to be very disappointed by that person's performance? I have too. I worked in human resources for 20 years. I hired a lot of people I thought were really, really good who turned out to be kind of duds. But why does this happen? How does this happen? It may start with the way that we actually recruit people and build our businesses and build our teams. And this usually starts with a job description. Now, a job description is ideally formal, but it's often informal. And it's a collection of attributes, qualities I want to have in my employee, the deliverables they'll bring, the things they should do for me. It's often a collection of unrelated things. Now, this is an example of an advertisement I saw recently for a job. And this demonstrates some of the problems that we have with a lot of job descriptions. The ideal candidate for this position as a business development manager needed to have proven experience in corporate development, private equity, venture capital, and banking, in addition to experience in management consulting, business development, product marketing, and product lifestyle management. Now, I am also guilty of having written these types of job descriptions and job advertisements in the past 20 years of human resources. This is what I did. No older than 32. And no older than 32 and speaks 15 languages. Yes, exactly. Granted, this is a bit of an extreme example. However, when I look at a lot of job descriptions and job advertisements, this really isn't that far from the reality. Essentially, this is what employers are looking for. Die eierlegende Wollmilchsau. As we all know, this creature does not exist.
There is no English term for that.
There is no English term for that.
All singing, dancing, or?
Huh?
All singing, dancing, something?
All singing, dancing. Well, what would the English term be? I don't have an English term for it. This is, but I'm sure you know what this means. This is a wool-producing, egg-laying, milk-giving pig, right? We want our ideal candidates to be everything. Now, if we morph this into maybe a different graphic, let's say that the yellow triangle are the attributes, the character traits, the qualities that we're looking for in our ideal employee, and the little figures on the outside are the deliverables, the things they do. As we go out as managers or as founders, entrepreneurs, and start to try to hire people, we realize, oh, it's going to be difficult to find this perfect candidate. So we'll adjust our expectations, we'll round things out a little bit to make it more palatable. However, who's on the other side of the table? This. People, candidates, all of us. A collection, a bundle of energies, of potentials, of conditionings, of strengths, of weaknesses, of aspirations, of energy. Very, very complex. And I'm sure you'll agree that the ideal does not fit to the reality. So what do people do? All of us. We start to tell stories about who we are. We give a version of ourselves to make ourselves attractive. We try to fit ourselves into a mold. Now, narratives and stories are essential to us humans. This is how we make meaning in the world. And yet, narratives and stories are creations of our imagination. Our narratives and stories oftentimes do not have a whole lot to do with reality. And this is where we kind of get into trouble. Think about, if those of you who have interviewed or hired other people, some of the stories that we hear in interviews or that we see in references. Yeah? I know I've also written my own reference before in my previous life. I'm telling a story. I'm trying to make myself look attractive. I'm trying to fit a mold. If the story that a candidate or we as people are telling matches close enough to the ideal that someone is looking for, then of course there's a labor contract. People come together. And that's when the trouble starts. Because who we are as people comes out. We bring this into the workplace. And what does traditional management and leadership do? It resorts back to this. Do as I say, or you're out the door. How can we go from this to inspiration. Let's start with reality first. These are our teams. Our teams are a collection of unique individuals, each with their own strengths and weaknesses, potential, pitfalls, conditionings. But each of these people, each of us, has this spark of genius, this potential for inspiration, a potential for high performance. And what we need to do is to begin to tap into that. Many of you will probably know this model. This is Maslow's hierarchy of needs. It essentially says that we all have various psychological needs that have a hierarchy. So at the very bottom, we have physiological needs for physical security, for food, for warmth. Once those needs have been met, then we have a set of social needs that emerge. And once those needs are met, then various more complex, abstract psychological needs begin to emerge in the psyche. And at the top of this pyramid is the need for self-actualization. And this model has also been expanded in recent years to include self-transcendence. Most people in developed countries are pretty high up on this hierarchy of needs. They have their basic social and physical needs met. So they have this real psychological need for self-expression, for self-actualization, even self-transcendence. And it's in this space where creativity takes place, where our potential for our best and highest contribution can be made. And yet few people are able to work from this space because our workplaces do not really foster and enable our abilities for highest and best contribution to be made. Now at the top of this pyramid, the pinnacle of this pyramid, this is also where flow takes place. You may have heard of the term flow. It's been around for about 20, 25 years and has entered now into positive psychology. Flow is the state where we are in a state of hyper concentration and we really enjoy what we're doing and we forget everything else around us. And we know that people in a state of flow are extremely productive and they're extremely happy. Now, wouldn't it be brilliant if we could work this way at least some of the time in our jobs? A few people do, but most of us unfortunately don't. This is the place, this pinnacle of where I believe inspiration can take place. If you think about children playing out on the playground, they're doing something they really enjoy, or maybe they're playing their PlayStations or something. Oftentimes they're in a state of flow. They're enjoying what they're doing. Now they're not productive in the sense that we think about productivity in the workplace, but there is a mental productivity going on. Now there are two things that are required for anybody to come into a state of flow or to move into the top of the Maslow pyramid. One of them being competence. So you have to be good at whatever you're doing. If you don't have that competence, it's difficult to enjoy it. Yeah, it's a source of frustration. So competence is important. And the other thing that's important is you need to enjoy doing it. And this is not just, oh, I like doing it. This is a deep satisfaction from doing the activity in and of itself. Doing the activity is the reward, regardless of any external rewards that may come. Now, if we think about the workplace, how many of our employees fulfill both of these necessities for highest and best contribution? Think about your own work. I'm sure all of us here are competent at what we do. I hope. We all have experience, we have qualifications, we have experience. But I invite you to ask yourself, how many of the things that I do in the workplace every day, that I do well, that I'm competent at, do I really enjoy doing? That I would do for the sake of doing them regardless of pay, regardless of title, regardless of status. if we're really honest with ourselves, the truth is that very little of the things that we do well in the workplace are things that we intrinsically enjoy. And this explains why I believe that highest and best contribution, that flow, that high productivity is something that we see so seldom in the workplace. But what would it mean for you in your work? What would it mean for your companies, for your organizations, for your teams? If we were able to do things that we do well and intrinsically enjoy doing. I'm sure you agree that we'd have a much higher level of performance, but we would probably also have a much higher level of life satisfaction, because this is something that will take into all other areas of our lives. If we could get our teams into this space of highest and best contribution at the pinnacle of the pyramid, that would be a pretty good step in the right direction. I'd like to share with you now how we might be able to do this. It's going to require a shift in our thinking, a paradigm change. We're going to have to stop making people in the workplace fit preconceived molds of what work is, of what they need to do and how they need to do it. And we need to start designing work around people, around each person's own intrinsic ability for high performance. Next one. Okay. Here is a model that can explain how we can do this. This is a model that's been around for a long time. It's called a functional dynamic theory of personality. And it says that within each of us, there are 4 basic drivers in the psyche that seek expression in all activities in our lives, in our work, in our relationships, in our free time. Each person has all 4 of the drivers in their psyche, and yet each person has a unique combination of these 4 energies. I'll call them energies. Within every person in this combination, this cocktail, there is one dominant way of being, one that basically describes how I show up in the world, how I communicate, the kinds of tasks that I enjoy doing and do well, the ways that I usually engage in conflict, the way that I learn. And we know from lots and lots of research and experiences that when people are doing tasks in their job or in other areas of life that are closely aligned with their dominant way of being in the world, that performance is an automatic given. For example, someone who's a very power-oriented person needs to have tasks in their job that allow them to make decisions, to be quick, to get things done, results. But if they have a job description that are requiring them to do lots of detailed work, keep Excel sheets up to date, do data banks, these kinds of things, and they're not allowed to do the thing that they do naturally well and enjoy doing, they'll be very, very frustrated. Yeah? Someone who's a very people-oriented person, same thing. They need to have tasks that allow them to build relationships and to communicate with other people, to build connections. But if they have a job description requiring them to do things that are not a part of that strength, too many job tasks, then that is a source of frustration. And I see this in my career coaching practice every day. People come to me about the middle of their careers have plateaued, they've been forced out of an organization, and they all say, Robert, I'm really frustrated with my career, what's going on? And when we sit down to find out where their core drivers are, and then we analyze the job that they just left or are potentially leaving, in 80% of all cases, I see a significant mismatch between where people's intrinsic drivers are and their abilities and what they're actually doing. And the solution is fairly simple. They have to start doing tasks, doing a job that is more closely aligned. Now, this is easier said than done because most of us have a whole list of qualifications and experience. We've been trimmed to do one type of task, one type of career. There's a lot of conditioning that goes around status and identification. And so one of the tasks that I have in my coaching when I'm working with people in this situation is to take a step back from a lot of those identifications and conditionings and to take a look at reality by asking the question, who am I? And what is it that I do best in this world? And when people make this shift and start finding work, designing work for themselves around who they are, they become very successful and very happy. Now, we can use this model also as a basis for understanding how teams operate, how individuals operate, how the collective organization operates, and we can also use it to facilitate this fundamental paradigm shift to designing work around people. Now, you will know, some of you, some of the tools that are here. This model's been around for a long time. You'll know the DISC model. This is the 4 colors model, also known as the insights model. I personally work with the core values index. It's a newer model, but these are all based on this concept of the 4 qualities of being that we have within ourselves. Now, the core values index is the one that I know best, I work with, and the company that designed this, called Taylor Protocols, has used this tool to go into some very large, very well-known companies and do reworking of teams, of reorganizations of teams. They'll be called in to work with teams that are not functioning very well, where there's a high amount of attrition in the organization, and they start to redesign work around people with astounding results. When the core values index is used to reorganize teams, to redesign work around people, these are the averages they've had over the last 25 years using this model. Job satisfaction goes up by as much as 40%. Employee turnover, which is voluntary termination, people quitting, goes down by as much as 30%. And all of you know how expensive terminations are. This is a key threat and becoming more and more of a key threat in a lot of industries, particularly the IT industry. So this is significant. Employee illness goes down. These are people calling in on a Monday morning or a Friday and saying, oh, I'm sick, I can't come to work today. Whether they're actually sick or not is another issue, but those kinds of absences go down. Team performance goes up, meaning teams meeting their collective goals. Total labor costs go down by as much as 20%, and profit center profits up by as much as 20%. This is the business case for stepping away from motivation and making people fit a preconceived mold and designing work around people that allows them to live from a place of inspiration. We can use this model or this tool or any of the tools that I just showed you in 3 scenarios in our organizations, also in other areas. I use it in coaching. It can also be used in therapy, but optimizing existing teams. So you have a team of existing people who may not be performing or working well together. In the organizational development, so as an organization evolves and needs to adjust itself to the market realities, and in recruitment and building new teams. So starting with optimizing an existing team, how do we do this? Well, we come back to this basic model, and there are 2 things that we need to do. We need to understand the people we have on our team, so we find out what is their potential for highest and best contribution. How do we get them? What is it that makes them move up to the top, to the pinnacle of the Maslow hierarchy of needs? And the second thing we need to do is we analyze all of the tasks, the deliverables, the duties in a particular organizational unit. And these things are then assigned one of the energies that is necessary, the attributes that are necessary to do that particular task very well. These individual tasks are then reassigned to the team members according to their own propensity for their high performance. An example might be, let's say you have a salesperson. There are going to be 3 particular deliverables that salespeople tend to bring. They have to build relationships with people, they have to get the signature on the bottom of the contract, and they usually have to document things. So if I have a salesperson who's very relationship, people-oriented, that first deliverable, they're going to do really, really well. Now, they may also have a secondary energy. They enjoy getting things done, right? So they'll be able to get the signature at the bottom of the contract. But most likely, they will not be very good at all the documentation. What I find with a lot of salespeople is they get really stuck in all the databases, the CRM, and all these things going on, which prevents them really from doing the things they do well. So in that situation, you take those tasks away from that person and you give it to someone else on the team who's really good with numbers, who's kind of an introvert, who is independent. And all of a sudden, you've brought a balance into the system. Now, it doesn't have to be as complex as this of analyzing and taking all the job descriptions, putting them into a pool and reassigning them. That's what Taylor Protocol does in large projects. It can also be something as simple as getting colleagues in a small team to sit together, compare their profiles of who they are, and trade a couple of jobs amongst each other. It works very, very well. Coming back to the second one, organizational development. As organizations grow and develop, they evolve. Moving from a startup to a more mature organization, there are energies, qualities that are necessary in each stage, but they change over time. What we can do with these models is we can assess where a team is collectively. Where are the strengths of the current team? And then we compare to see where does the organization need to be to meet the needs of the market, the demand, whatever has developed and changed. What it entails two things to making the shift is assuring that people are doing the right things on the team, but it may also mean changing the constitution of the team, changing the makeup of the team. I'll give you two examples. I worked with a small startup a couple of years ago. It was a creative agency, so people who were really into relationships, and they had lots of visions and ideas, and they had creating solutions. And this is exactly what the agency needed to start up. As the business grew, the founders, who were very creative, very people-oriented people, brought others onto the team who were like themselves, which also became the problem. Because as the team grew, as the business grew and became more successful, they came up with some issues. They were not delivering what they promised to clients. They didn't have their financials in order. Because the people on the team who were brilliant at the creative work simply didn't have the competency, the skills, or the desires to get all the action, to make the decisions and have the financials set up. Now, one of the things that has happened in traditional organizational development is they'll work with the senior manager to try to warp them into a different way of being. So coaching the managing director, who's a creative, to be more powerful or more results and data oriented. That doesn't work. In this case, what we did is we brought a senior leader onto the team who was a very power and action oriented person who had a lot of financial savvy, and he was given the authority to do that part of the business that needed to get done for the team to be successful, allowing the creative directors to do what they do best. Now, of course, that situation does require some coaching because there's maybe a power struggle that comes up, but when everybody understands their role, and what the organization needs, then you find that proper balance. Second example, I also worked with a senior leadership team at an oil and gas company, a lot of engineers. So they were good at creating systems and data and these kinds of things, but the managing director couldn't make decisions. It wasn't his strength, and he was running into problems. And again, here the solution was to bring a co-managing director on who had the authority to push things forward, and that brought a balance to the organization. And then coming back to the third scenario, recruitment, building teams. This is pretty easy. If you're building a new team, you have your list of things you want to have done. So you can create, using this model, an ideal profile. What does the ideal candidate look like in terms of their strengths, their abilities, their energies? And then you go out and search for people who match that. What happens traditionally? Traditionally, then, we go out and look for people who have a certain skill set, qualifications, experience, references. And we know from experience that that doesn't always work. What we do with this model is we get people's profiles first to find out what drives them. And if and only if there's a very, very close match to the qualities that are necessary for best and high performance in the position, then we take a look at qualifications, experience, etc. Why? Because we know that when people are intrinsically driven, when they're able to make their own contribution, when they're inspired, they will perform well, regardless of their qualifications, experiences, etc. Yeah? And if we can match those, then we have a basis for high performance. Tailored Protocols also does recruitment this way, and they guarantee hiring when they do a hiring project, and they say a 95% success rate with this, which is extremely high. This concept is not new. The concept has been around for a while. Unfortunately, very, very few employers actually recruit this way, which leads to the high fluctuation that we have. So I've given you this morning a couple of insights on how we can move away from the old paradigm of motivation to get high performance towards an inspiration, a workplace that enables people to perform based on who they truly are. So my invitation to you today is to stop motivating yourself, stop motivating other people. Find out who you are intrinsically, what your capacity for best and highest performance is, and to go out and do that.